I just got back from watching Gladiator 2 in the cinema, and I have some thoughts about it. I suspect this video will be partly a rant, but I think there's some interesting things to comment about the movie. It's not a very good movie. I'd say it actually is a bad movie, in a lot of ways, in most ways. But as a piece of art that reflects our time and a moment, it is interesting to comment. So I'm going to go through some of my notes. I've got them here in front of me. They won't be particularly structured, and I'll probably go back and forth a bit, but let's see where we get to. To start off, the script is pretty poor. Characters know things they shouldn't, when they shouldn't. They guess at intentions that we as the viewer know, but the characters have no reason to know about. Characters teleport from place to place, or at least the trajectory of characters between scenes is not really thought about. Rome is essentially a bunch of rooms. It doesn't feel like a space. There's a few examples I can give. This video will be full of spoilers. But the main character meets his mother several times when he shouldn't be able to, when she is considered an enemy of the state, essentially, and she's locked up, from what I can remember. Also, just Denzel Washington's character being alone with the emperors as often as he is. And yes, there are two emperors. We'll get to that. But there are many moments where characters should be executed. There are many moments where the protagonist and some of the other characters should just be put to death, or should just be killed quietly, or quickly. But they're not, because of the plot. And in the first one, Maximus, the main character of the first movie, was not killed for political reasons, even though Commodus, the emperor, wanted to kill him. Maximus was incredibly popular, and Commodus was very, very conscious of how important it was to be popular. Whether or not that's historical, probably isn't, but it was a plot device, and in this movie it's just, characters just survive until they don't, and it's mostly to do with the plot and trying to hit certain beats. Dialogue is really clumsy in the movie as well. There's constant references to words from the previous movie. There's, they keep referencing, the dream of Rome. I think strength and honor is repeated often. I mean, a lot of words of Maximus's are just verbatim repeated in ways that the characters shouldn't know about. It's almost as if it feels like a movie where the characters are conscious that the previous movie existed. They keep referencing it. And not in a natural way, not in a way that you would think, oh, there's this famed character from 16 years ago, Maximus, who everyone still knows about and was very impactful to the way politics and Rome is run. And we all just know things that he did. No, it's done in a way of, oh, there's this movie that the audience will want referenced, and so we'll reference it. There's also there's the character development, if there is character development in the movie. My impression is to say there isn't, because it doesn't feel organic. It feels, again, plot-based. It feels like, okay, now we need them to get along again, and now we need them to feel sorry when the other person dies, and now we need drama again, so let's have some rubbing, let's have some fights and conflict. That's what happens, but it very much feels, and this is getting back to the script, but it feels that characters do things in how you would write a script, and this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. There's no, and this happened because that happens, and as a consequence this occurs, and as a consequence this occurs. There's no consequentialism, essentially. It'll just a series of events, and rooms that connect when they shouldn't, and dialogue that feels self-referential. There's also just some really clumsy and funny dialogue. If you've watched the movie, maybe wood or steel a point is still a point. Was a standout line for me when the character kills someone with a wooden sword. Wood or steel, a point is still a point. I mean, that's the slow blade penetrates the shield levels. I like it. It's hilarious. But, a part of me does enjoy that kind of dialogue. So there's, on the point of the script, there's a lot of plot conveniences. There's no prison guards when there should be prison guards. The characters often meet really early on in the script when they just shouldn't, in the sense that the main character, who is a gladiator, a slave, it comes face to face with the emperors immediately upon arriving on Rome. And sure, his sponsor, the trainer, is, very high up. I'm not sure why. He's just really high up in circles. He's invited to all these parties. And he has a friendship with the senator, but that's really it. And he has a champion gladiator eventually. But as soon as they arrive in Rome, they just meet the emperors, and the character can cite Virgil at the emperors. The world doesn't feel real, partly because of things like that. There's just several moments in the movie where their Praetorian Guard doesn't behave like, even with the depiction they have in the movie, which is very much of like a police force, not a personal guard to the emperor or a political institution, which it became in Rome in history. They sort of just act deranged. There's just moments. There's moments of them holding back the crowd so the main character can just get to their person the Praetorian Guard is supposed to be protecting. And there's many moments like that. They're sort of like a force of the plot in the movie. They do what they need to do so the symbolism gets across, also that the characters can do what they need to do. Now, on that note, Ridley Scott has abandoned all pretenses of being historically anchored. Now, I don't think he really ever had any. Gladiator 1 wasn't particularly realistic for a lot of, historically truthful in very many ways. Napoleon, if you saw that, was difficult to watch, and partly because it's sort of like Napoleon fan fiction in certain ways. And in this movie, it's similar. That's like I don't have a huge problem with that. It takes me out of the movie. I'm not immersed when I notice these things because there's some things that are just obvious, and I'll go through a few in a second. But clearly, Ridley Scott is interested in the vibes of Rome, the symbolism of Rome, whatever it represents to his modern mind. And I have some theories, as we'll get into, of what it represents to his modern mind. But I think it's a shame. I think there's plenty to learn from history without us having to make fan fictions based on vibes. Because if we do that, what we're ultimately doing is just putting a skin where role-playing our impression of a past. We're not actually depicting a past. And all that's going to do is be self-referential. The movie just tells us a lot about us right now. And in ways that are just not clever or not subtle. Now, about some of the historical inaccuracies, it's just fun to list through a few of them. There's a trebuchet in the movie. I'm pretty sure that's a high medieval thing. But there's a trebuchet in the movie. There's a contested landing, which is a mainstay of historical movies. It seems it happens like in every other historical movie. I can name 2 others besides this one. Troy does it, and I think the modern Robin Hood does it as well. So, it's whatever. The movie starts with a contested landing on Numidia, by the way, which I don't think the Romans ever conquered. They were allies and enemies at points, but the Romans never conquered Numidia, from what I understand. And they definitely didn't under, 16 years after Marcus Aurelius was emperor. But whatever. What else? Well, there's twin emperors. I don't think these are real emperors. I don't think they existed, which is strange to have them in a world where Commodus and Marcus Aurelius are characters. Sure, they're not the Commodus and Marcus Aurelius of history, but it's strange to have them in the same universe, just 2 random twin emperors. We don't know where they come from. We don't know where they were in the first movie. They just are there. And we don't know they don't seem to have any familial connections at all. They're just there. So, they're a device. There's also mechanical hidden doors in the movie, pressing a brick and it goes into the wall and the wall opens up. That's in the movie. One of the characters references reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which is strange. But it's less strange if you take this next example of ahistoricism. A senator is reading a newspaper at one point, a newspaper that says Roma in capital letters. So, if they have the printing press, then I suppose they could, print Meditations for distribution. Yes, a newspaper. Opium is also, something that happens. The character is given opium to deal with the pain of an injury. and he is high on it for a bit. I'm not sure why that's in the movie. It is. Obviously, there's the obligatory flaming arrows and artillery, anti-infantry artillery, obligatory. Has to be in every historical movie, otherwise it's not cool. Normal arrows just don't cut it anymore. And in the movie, there's a first and second console. There's not two consoles, there's a first and a second console. That's like, it's made to, like, the impression is that that's a difference that matters. Okay, as well as having two emperors, by the way. That's just some of the historical inaccuracies. I'm sure I've missed some. Those are some that I managed to note down. The movie also script-wise messes a lot with the original movie. Like, it makes... The first movie is subtle in some ways in the ending. Like, the ending, there's no there's no proof that Rome is going to be better. After the first movie, it's sort of like just Commodus is dead and he was bad and he was a bad influence, so at least that's over with. And there's also like some hints that maybe Maximus is Marcus Aurelius' daughter's lover. In this movie, that's confirmed. Not only that, he's the father of Lucius, which is a young boy and the protagonist in this movie. It's just weird to mess with the original movie. Like, why can't you just have a movie and not have it mess with the... why does it have to be 16 years after the first one? Whatever. We're just remaking the movie if we're complaining about that, however. Oh yeah, there's... A lot of the tone is really off, and the characters often don't feel human in two ways that I'll point out. One is physically. They just sort of act like superheroes. They sort of shrug off punches, and, they get hit by a shield rim in the face quite a few times, punched in the stomach, punched in the face, and they just kind of go on about it. They act like superheroes, The characters charged, obviously helmetless, shieldless, with just a sword kind of swinging at it. They just, kill 5-10 men in 10 seconds. It feels like watching a Marvel movie in that way, but also in the tone that the characters give off. They're a lot happier than you would think if they were real characters. So if you think back on the first movie, Maximus has his wife and son killed, and he's enslaved and branded and sold into gladiatorial combat. And he's pretty depressed about it. Like, he's stoic. That's a big deal in the first movie, stoicism. Marcus Aurelius is a character. But he's not happy about it. He's serious. He refuses to fight at first. He is, there's anger, there's rage there, but he is pretty anguished, as you would expect. In this movie, the main character loses his wife, and that's played on in a few moments symbolically, like, she's waiting for me and I have someone to go to, and, points out that he doesn't really fear death. But he and the other slaves are pretty happy about everything that's happening, like they're being carted around in cages and they're joking and smiling, and, there's lepers on the street, and there's famine, and there's beggars, and there's corruption, and they're just sort of having a laugh, which is just feels off. It's another element that just pulls you out of the movie. You feel like you're watching a Marvel movie, and you're like, okay, am I supposed to care about the corruption of Rome and the sickness and the plague, the social plague that is facing the city, or not? And because you're looking at the main character, you sort of deduce, okay, I don't have to care. And you don't. Now, that's a lot of criticism. That's a lot of ranting. Now let's get into some things that the movie does get right, or to maybe put it more delicately, things that the movie illustrates about our time. What does it say that the movie was made in the way it does? That's sort of what I'm getting at. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but the vibes of Rome still hold power. The specific vibes of an alien, incestuous, like, tyrant, or duo tyrants in this case, that rule over, warlike and, manly Roman people. That's a vibe that still works. That's interesting. It is changed, however, from Commodus. And Commodus, it was a lot more psychological. And this one, it's actually... I wonder if I'd say this if this had come out before Dune Part 1 or Part 2. But the twin emperors are very Harkonnen-like. They're very pale. And even the Colosseum announcer is bald and pale. It is... it's reminiscent of this sort of depiction of tyranny that's pretty topical right now. The movie insists on the dream of Rome, and that's a fair way to put it. This is a dreamlike representation of Rome, and it really isn't consistent on what sort of dream of Rome, because I think I counted 3 different definitions of what the dream of Rome was, often by the same character, or by the same exchange of dialogue. There's an emphasis on the vanity of the emperors. They just want to expand and they want glory because, which there were emperors like that. But it's interesting that's the depiction we get. It's notable. What does it tell us about the way we see our governments, or the way art chooses to depict power, or corrupt power specifically? So Rome is depicted sort of like the capital of the Hunger Games, if you remember that. It's Nero's Rome came to mind, so Nero the drunkard and the madman. It's very much so, especially the upper echelons of the social hierarchy. That's the impression it gives, is of excess and even visually, like makeup, flamboyant dressing, public sort of erotic demonstrations. The emperors have their, what you have to assume are their sex slaves, male and female, around their throne in social gatherings or their thrones. So that's interesting. That's notable. About the Harkonnen comparison. Even there's a fight in the film in the Colosseum between Acacius, that was his name, the Roman virtuous general in this movie. And he fights off like 5 Praetorian soldiers, and their armor is very Harkonnen-like. It's very, alien and black and bug-like. That was notable. These are visual linguistics that match up. Oh yes, and on that point of the Roman emperors and the upper echelons of Roman society being sort of decrepit and publicly sexual, and that's depicted as sort of unpleasant. That when the emperors first meet with our main character, I'll call him Lucius. I know he goes by another name as well, a barbarian name, but I'll call him Lucius because that's the one I remember. When they meet Lucius, faced with that, with cruelty and bloodlust and sort of social depravity, or at least it's depicted that way, he quotes Virgil at them, which is interesting because it tells you there's simultaneously a vision of Rome as, that vision of Rome, that vibe of Rome as an analog for corruption, and then there's the vibe of Rome as the analog for classical virtue. So that's interesting that those two match up. Oh yes, so let's talk about the Roman dream, the dream of Rome. After his first, in front of the emperor, his first gladiatorial victory, the slave master, I'll call him, I don't remember the character's name, but he's played by Denzel Washington, so I'll probably just call him Denzel or Denzel's character. Not to equate the two people, but that's the name I can remember. Denzel places down 2 gold coins, 2 denarii, in front of Lucius. And Lucius says, what use do I have for coin? And he says, well, Gladiator can buy his freedom. And he says, the Roman dream, which I thought was such a clumsy but interesting jab at the American dream. Because he says, it's not a Roman dream, it's a slave dream. And that rang out bells of like, social commentary. But it is interesting. It's interesting that is something that the script chose to highlight. It's pretty direct. They mention a few times Rome under fair law and protection, Senate and hope. These are all elements of the dream of Rome when the conspiracy is all meeting together. So this is Marcus Aurelius' dream. Fair law and protection, Senate and hope. Interestingly, no mention of freedom, which is usually one of the key, coins that are the coined words that are thrown around. Something like that. Fair law and protection, Senate and hope. Interesting. Different to the Roman, to buying your freedom. But oh well. Denzel's character also mentions once he takes control of the empire, which we'll get to the more interesting things about that later. when he takes control of the empire, he says, "I was owned by an emperor, now I own an empire. Where else could this be but in Rome?" Again, the analog to Rome as a social critique in this movie, of a social critique of the United States, is clumsy, but it is there. The American dream, the Roman dream, a slave's dream. Where else could you climb up from being a slave to owning an empire? Interesting. The movie ends with Lucius proclaiming that once Rome was a city for the many, and a refuge for the needy. Again, that's very much an idyllic dream. Rome was never that. The world was for Rome to make it its empire, and Rome was the center. That was their vision of the world, from what I can tell. They did not care about the many and the needy at all. I suppose read some history. It's just not a thing. But again, this is a symbolic representation. What does it tell us about? Clearly the script was rushed. This is very obvious watching the movie. The script was rushed or wasn't revised enough. So the fact that this is the first blurt that comes out of a scriptwriter, this is what they blurt out when they can think, oh, this is an ideal that we can go for. That tells us something. A city for the many and a refuge for the needy. That's an ideal that we have. Also, the tone of this movie is a lot more revolutionary than the first. The first one, it ends with one man fighting another man and killing him, and they both die, and there's regime change. That's what's implied, that there's regime change. In this one, the tone's a lot more popular, like the populace turns against the emperor, and it's like the Praetorians versus the people, and the tone is a lot more like, just insurrection. There's sprinkling of that. It's not consistent. Not a lot in the movie is. The script is clearly rushed, but it's there. Now, let's try and talk about what meaning some of these interesting things have. So, it's interesting that the protagonist, Lucius, is a Roman who is more Roman because he has forgotten that he is Roman. Now, what does that tell us about our vision of virtue? Our vision of the West? Because I have to think that Rome in this movie and in a lot of these movies, Ridley Scott, I think, is direct with this parallel. Rome is the West. And, there's some veracity in identity-wise there, and historically. Our identity historically. But what does it tell us? That the Roman ideal is a barbarian. At least not in blood or in genetics, but in upbringing. We want someone to come from the outside and save us from ourselves. And that's emphasized with the gladiators, but I have a note on that later. How interesting that the co-protagonist is a general seeking insurrection. Seeking, from what I understand, to be Caesar. He is the heir apparent's lover. The daughter of Marcus Aurelius is the one they plan to put on the throne once they get rid of the twin emperors. And he is her lover. So, and there is glances and there is it's implied, at least I read it as such, that he will become Caesar. So the general seeking insurrection to become Caesar is the good guy, is the co-protagonist. How interesting. Tells us a bit about what we want if we talk about politically, what the popular zeitgeist is about, the ideal leader, where the ideal leader would come from. In the first movie, I mentioned that it's like, the movie ends with a man killing another. It's a politician's win. It's a king's win. It's duel by combat. One man kills another equals new regime. Here it's more about people versus the police. It's the Praetorians. But, they aim their bows at the crowd tensely, by the way, as if they were guns. But it's very visually reminiscent of popular depictions of police abuse. That was clearly at play several times during the movie. The visuals of, Praetorians riding down and wielding their swords like their clubs. Those are then their shields. The parallels are there, visually. This partly also happens in Napoleon. I remember this being something that happened in Napoleon. People versus soldiers being parallel for police. But not gladiators. Gladiators are good soldiers. They're the good guys. The movie sort of, I think that might be the right term. The script sort of admits what is the most likely outcome of this sort of situation it's built. And it's not wish fulfillment, because it's not the good guy. The new Caesar is Denzel. And he doesn't come out, he's not a plebeian who rises. He's not a general who comes back. He's a businessman. He's a businessman with a chip on his shoulder, who climbs the social ladder not through connection, but through debts owed to him. And he conquers the state and wishes to destroy it completely. Now that actually is a thing I think the movie gets right. I think that's the most likely depiction of how a new Caesar emerges in the environment it portrayed. Oh, a funny element in the movie of when one of the twin emperors is killed by Denzel's character, and he keeps the mad one alive. He hails first consul the monkey, Dondus. Yeah, Dondus, I think it was him. Hail Dondus. And Denzel, to this mad boy king, who says, Hail Dondus, the monkey. Denzel comes in and says, Hail Dondus. And all the senators follow his lead and clap, standing. See deer, say horse. The Chinese myth. It's essentially that. A cool little thing, it shows who's really in power. The guy who can make everyone hail a monkey. Also, I think this is maybe... Okay, so there's a line in the movie. Lucius tells his friend, the doctor, to go fetch him an army. And he says, I am the Prince of Rome. I am summoning the army to the defense of a new republic. I think that's a perfect line. I think that's hyper real in a lot of levels. It is admitting the princely connection of Rome, the sort of what in history was the unsaid rule of it's a hereditary monarchy, but we're going to call it a republic. And I just think that line, I am the Prince of Rome, I am summoning an army to the defense of a new republic. It might be the sole reason that the script is the way it is, in the sense that I could imagine that line emerging in someone's like, oh, we should play with this idea, and then writing a whole script about it, and then not revising very much. But that might be the genesis for the movie emerging. This concept of, and what does that say about our time, We want a prince to create a new republic. Gosh, there's so much to play with there. I'm fascinated by that. And then, this Prince of Rome, Lucius, summons the gladiators, and, before they go in, says, find honor by my sword, for there is none in Rome. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, there's no honor in Rome. There's find honor by my sword. Strength and honor, he tells them, and they all chant strength and honor. So, the gladiators are the ones that are going to bring back honor to Rome by the strength of their sword. He tells this to, the gladiators, who are all, as it's said in the movie, foreign prisoners of war. So the barbarians, again, it's the Prince of Rome starting a new republic, a prince who has grown up outside Rome, who does not have Roman customs, and is going to restore the Roman Republic with an army of foreign warriors. I mean, this is fantasy. This is wish fulfillment. I mean, I think this is a popular, erotic fantasy of regime change. It's fascinating that it was depicted this way. It's as I said, one of the few things that are hyper real in the movie. Yeah, I suppose to end that note on the end on politics. One thing the movie gets right politically is that you don't have the throne until every single other possible claimant is dead. And at the end of the movie, that's what the main character's done. He's killed. Well, he hasn't killed directly, maybe, but his mother is dead. His grandfather is dead. The two emperors are dead. The general is dead. And Denzel's character, who had taken power, is also dead. And so he's the last one standing with a legitimate claim on the throne and having killed the guy with the biggest sword. Denzel. So, yeah, makes sense that he's Caesar. Prince of Rome. Those are my thoughts immediately after watching the movie. Thanks for listening. That was a bit long-winded and ranty, but I hope you got something out of that. I definitely did.